Welcome to episode number 52 of the Made to Excel Fitness podcast. I'm your host as always, Mark Torres, and in today's episode, we're going to get into some questions. So a couple weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago by the time you guys listen to this, I had you guys send in some questions. It's been a while since I've done a Q&A. So excited to have some questions from the people, aka you. So without further ado, let's just hop right into it. I've got enough questions that I think that this is going to be a two-parter. So if I don't answer your question today, it'll absolutely, definitely be in next week's episode. So be on the lookout for that as well. And the first question to start off today's podcast is the perfect question to start off today's podcast, because the question is, what made you start the podcast? So I think really simply, some of you guys may or may not know this, but I started Made to Excel Fitness, which is the name of my brand and obviously the namesake of this podcast. I think back in 2017, it was either 2017 or 2018. Everything blurs now. And it started off as Made to Excel Fitness apparel. And for one reason or another, story for another day, I think I tell it in the very first episode, apparel side of it just didn't really ever take off. And eventually I just got to the point where I had to focus a lot less on the apparel, and I really wanted to make a shift and a transition towards putting out fitness content. And back then, there was no rhyme or reason to what I was doing. So I had a YouTube channel, but I was definitely not posting consistently. I had the Instagram and the Facebook, but once again, still not posting consistently. I think I called them MTE Fit Tips, which is a weekly IGTV video. I think I did them like Wednesday nights, but nobody's going on Instagram to watch a 7-minute video. That's not the platform for that. So that wasn't doing that great. And then I started doing MTE Quick Hits, I think I called them. They're all still on Instagram. If you scroll down, you'll find them. But I post a lot, so kind of deep and buried in there at this point, which the MTE Quick Hits were like 1-minute snippets, 1-minute tips. But I think making a bunch of those a week was pretty tedious. So once again, my scheduling, my consistency when it came to content production wasn't there. I wasn't making consistent content, which in the game of content creation, consistency is key. You can't be an authority in a particular subject if you don't post often. You know, like, oh, this is the smartest fitness guy that's out there, but he posts once every 2.5 months. That's not really how that works. You've got to be consistent. So, it just got to the point where I had to make a decision. What is going to be my content avenue? Am I going to go into this full blown? I've got to make a decision. I've got to be better with my content creation. And at that point in my life, I didn't have a customer facing job. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I would literally go to work and listen to 7-8 hours straight of just podcasts because I got sick of listening to the same songs over and over again. That's how I discovered podcasts. I said, holy shit, I should have my own podcast. What am I doing? So that's really where the idea of the podcast came about. And it's a beautiful thing because I have now this long form media, because I talk a lot and I ramble, so I can make a long video. So I can put out content every week on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And this is really the most beautiful thing about this podcast. I have content on those two platforms every week. And then also, of course, I record it if you're watching this. That's a YouTube video every week. And then now that I have it recorded, I can clip it and cut pieces of it a minute at a time, and I can put them on Instagram and on Facebook. So from one single recording, I could have content on, anywhere from 4 to 5 different platforms for the entire week, right? So I cut the podcast video up to like 12 different videos, and I post them pretty much every day throughout the week on Instagram and on Facebook. So for those who don't listen to the podcast straight through, or maybe they forgot things when they listen to it, it gets reiterated on Instagram and Facebook. So I have the long form content. It holds me accountable. If I say I got a podcast dropping every week, by golly, I better have a podcast releasing every week. So it keeps me accountable. It has me on a consistent schedule, and I'm able to kill a lot of birds with one single stone and have a lot of content for all these different platforms and be a more consistent poster. And for those of you who are like, shit, everybody and their mother has a podcast now, because I'm absolutely one of those people that says that. Listen, I came up with the idea of this podcast way back at the beginning of 2020. And the first episode of this podcast came out on March 16th, 2020, and for those of you who know, you know that that's the day that the world shut down. So obviously I didn't have the foresight to be like, fuck, we're going to go into a 7-month shutdown. Let me boot up a podcast and get it dropped this day of all days where everything closes, and then kind of go from there. So lick my ass if you're like this guy. Of course he has a podcast because everybody has a podcast now. I'm just kidding. I was like right at the beginning of that upswing of like everybody has a podcast, but now really everybody has a podcast. Every single celebrity, like, I'm locked in the house. What else is there to do? Podcast. So, I was right at the beginning of that upswing, but here I am 52 episodes later. So, we're deep into it now. We're way knee deep into it. Great first question. Question number 2, what is your dream job? So I'm already in the right field. I do want to be a personal trainer / fitness coach, interchangeable terms, I guess. But if I were to carve out my absolute dream life, I would do exactly what I'm doing now, but do it full-time, and if not full-time, damn close to full-time, online. And I think the reasoning for going online is really threefold. I think reason number 1 is obviously the amount of people that you can help being an online coach versus being a coach in a gym is greatly improved, right? The amount of people that you can help is like exponentially higher, as opposed to working in a gym and only being limited to the amount of people that come and work out at the gym that you work at. Anybody online who comes across your content is a potential client and somebody that you could potentially help. So the amount of people that I can help in an online setting is obviously way higher than I could in a gym. So that's, number 1 case for being an online trainer. Number 2, and this comes with like the dream part of it, is like having a flexible schedule. So, being in a gym, you're at the disposal of people, right? If somebody wants to work out really early in the day and somebody wants to work out really early at night, you have to be available for both of those people. Well, you don't have to, but, if you want to, be a full-time personal trainer, you probably should be available to both of those people, which means you probably have a pretty shitty schedule. That's kind of the nature of the beast. That's the worst part about the personal training space, but it makes sense. People are working during the day. You got to be there early. You got to be there late. And for sometimes it's like you got to do both on every single day. And that might mean that you wake up really early and you take a nap in the middle of the day and you come back at night. So it's kind of a really shitty schedule in terms of personal training. So by going online, you have a much more flexible schedule because you're not there with the person every single time they're working out. You're not watching them. You have a program for them. You send them off to do their thing. They come back and check in with you. And it's doing this in a remote setting, so you don't have to be there. And your schedule is, a lot more flexible. So you have time to hang out with your family. And I just got a new puppy, so I'd have time to hang out with the dog. So all of these things that come with a great flexible schedule, which is obviously appealing and something that you got to work towards. That would be my dream scenario. And last but not least, the third reason for being an online personal trainer, I think this is the most important reason and something that I've never heard anybody talk about, I think, is that there's a big social anxiety aspect to personal training. And I think part of it is on my account because I do enjoy interacting with people. I do enjoy talking to people. I do enjoy connecting with people, but especially people that I know really well and that I have commonalities with that I know of. So, if I know somebody really well, they're a friend or, somebody that I've had interactions with before, it's really easy for me to have that interaction. Some people might say that I don't shut the fuck up enough. Even in a professional setting where I'm the trainer and I'm talking to a client or a potential client, we still have a commonality. We're working towards the same goal. So I have no problem with that interaction as well. I'm perfectly comfortable in that setting. But the idea of being with a complete stranger and trying to small talk with that person scares the shit out of me. Like, that's a social anxiety situation for me. I'm not super bad about it. It's not like I'm going to have an anxiety attack, but it does make me feel very uncomfortable. So, from the client's perspective, I can see, and this is a great example because this just happened to me like a few weeks ago. I went to Taco Bell, went through the drive-thru, had a mobile order. I got food and I got a Baja Blast. So when I went up to the drive-thru window and they gave me a bag of food and they didn't give me the Baja Blast, I knew I paid for it. I just ordered it 5-10 minutes before, but I don't want to put that person or myself in a potentially awkward scenario. I don't want to be a burden on that person. I don't want to make that person feel bad for, messing up an order, whatever the case may be. So I drove away without saying anything, even though I paid for the Baja Blast, because that situation gives me a lot of social anxiety. And that's something that I've got to work on, obviously, because I paid for a fucking Baja Blast and I didn't get the Baja Blast. And, Baja Blast is my favorite soda of all time. But it's just like that's a social anxiety situation for me, and I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. So from a client perspective, if there's any sort of indication that somebody might feel socially anxious about going into a gym where they already don't feel comfortable and approaching a stranger that is the trainer and asking them for help, they don't want to feel like a burden. They don't want to have an awkward situation. They don't want to potentially be told that they're doing everything wrong by this personal trainer, depending on how the personal trainer communicates with people. There's a lot of things that from a client's perspective could cause some of that social anxiety that I feel, like when I go to Taco Bell and they don't give me the drink and they mess up the order. So I think from an online setting, obviously there's still interaction that has to occur, because as a personal trainer, there's no way you're going to know everything you need to know about a client to help them create a really good program by looking at their Facebook profile picture, of course. But having interactions through a screen, whether it be via email, whether it be via text, whether it be via Zoom, FaceTime, however you end up coordinating that with a potential client, is probably going to diminish the social anxiety by a lot. If I can eliminate and whittle down any sort of social anxiety that somebody feels towards fitness, then that's great, because that very well may be the person's big barrier to getting into a fitter, healthier lifestyle, because they just don't want to approach a personal trainer, and that scares them. So if I can tear down that barrier for them, and that can be the catalyst and the introduction to their fitness and health life journey, that's a fantastic thing to do. It saves me from any potential social anxiety. It saves them from any potential social anxiety. So I think that is a big thing that I've never heard anybody talk about. So, threefold: helping more people, having a flexible schedule, and releasing that social anxiety. Once again, that's my dream job scenario, and hopefully within the next few weeks/months, I'm working on doing some things to hopefully start my journey into the online coaching world. For some of you guys out there who are looking for an online coach, be on the lookout. Question number 3, what is your favorite horror movie? So obviously I looked at these questions in advance, so I have a little bit of a list. And this is going to be really sacrilegious because I'm wearing a Camp Crystal Lake shirt and Friday the 13th is not on my list. I'm sorry, Jason. I think maybe in no particular order, but I think one of the best horror movies of all time, boring answer, but it's got to be the OG Halloween. OG Halloween, for some reason, stands the test of time. Some of these older movies, the pacing is different because of the era that it was made in. And you try to watch them now, and they're really slow, and not a lot of stuff happens because we've been conditioned to watch movies where everything is happening, every minute. And that's really not how movies were made back then. But for some reason, not that Halloween is a fast-paced movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still really rewatchable even to this day in 2021 and going forward. So OG Halloween, one of the best movies of all time. Scream, I think, is another one that comes to mind because Scream is the first time ever that you're getting the horror movie explained to you while you're watching a horror movie, which is really cool. The original Saw, so when the original Saw came out, I was still pretty young, so my parents watched it, and they didn't want me to see all the gory stuff in the middle of the movie, but the twist at the end, they wanted me to see that, so they showed me the beginning part. They kind of set up the story. They didn't show me the middle parts where everything kind of nasty happens, and then they showed me the end when the twist happens, and Little Mark's brain back then was blown that they could do a twist like this in a movie, and they could kind of rewrite everything and kind of reshape your reality that you thought you were living in. That was really cool. It was nice to see a twist. And then Beetlejuice I just watched for the first time in my adult life last year. It's not really a horror movie. There's really nothing scary about it. There's a few kind of scary scenes, but kind of the blend of horror elements with comedy and still being lighthearted, and Michael Keaton does a fantastic job as Beetlejuice. That's definitely up there. So that's 4 answers. Those are 4 kind of boring answers. So a little off the beaten path. I did write down 2 movies. One is Hell House LLC, which if you like found footage movies like Paranormal Activity and The Blair Witch Project, Hell House LLC is in that vein. But it is kind of a little bit unnerving if you're not into that sort of thing. Or if you're into that sort of thing, you might like Hell House LLC. Gives you the skeevies. And last but not least, way off the beaten path, and this is not me trying to be artsy-fartsy, but back in college, I did take history of film class, I think it was called. So we watched a lot of old movies, and one of the movies that we watched was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or Caligari, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. It's a movie that came out in 1920, black and white, silent film. There's no dialogue. There's words on the screen, and you can follow from there. And I think it's on Tubi right now, so you can feasibly go out and watch it, but I don't know if I suggest it, but there's a big major twist at the end, which back in 1920, which is over 100 years ago at this point, 101 years ago, it's kind of really cool to see how cinema now is really not all that different from what they were doing 100 years ago. There's a lot more bells and whistles, a lot of visual effects that they can do now, which is great. But storytelling, storyline has all been the same all throughout, and it's a really good twist. If you do want to check it out, check it out. I don't suggest you check it out if you're not into black and white and silent movies, but if you're really curious, I think it's on Tubi, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Check it out. Question number 4, what is the biggest mistake you see in the gym? I think generally it's people who bite off more than they can chew, especially at the beginning, and more specifically, people who are grabbing onto the center console of the treadmill when they're on an incline. All right, and last but not least for today's podcast episode, how many reps of a certain workout should I be doing? I'm trying to shoot for 12 to 15 reps per workout to build muscle, but I see conflicting information online. So I think I just did an episode, or maybe it was a YouTube video. Everything starts to blend at some point, about rep ranges, and maybe it was a YouTube video. I think at this point, the idea of like a hypertrophy rep range where you're building muscle, or a strength rep range where you're building just strength and not muscle, kind of interchangeably there, I think that premise has been more or less debunked. I think no matter the rep range, I think in the video I said 1 to 25 plus. Really, maybe the singles, like the 1 rep, is really, skewed towards building strength versus building muscle. But anything like past like 5 or more reps is going to build hypertrophy more or less very similarly to each other. So when it comes to picking your rep ranges, I like to, and I prefer having a large array of rep ranges that you try to hit. For the most part, it's going to be like your very first lift of the day is going to be a heavy lift where you do less reps. It could be anywhere from 6 to 8 reps. And then your middle workouts of the day is going to be anywhere from 10 to 12 reps. And then the last part of the day, when it's your accessory work, your smaller muscle group things, that could be anywhere from 12 to 15 or plus reps. So that's typically how I do things. If you're a true blue beginner, I typically just try to do 3 sets of 10 of everything because it's easy to remember. And then once you start to feel comfortable with that, you can start to differentiate rep ranges. But I think for muscle building, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to get stuck in that 12 to 15 rep range. That's not going to be optimal for building muscle versus, doing something in the 6 to 8 rep range. They're both very similar, but what you do when you differentiate the reps is have different performance aspects that come with it, which is really good. You want to be a well-rounded individual as well as still build muscle. So trying to play with the different rep ranges that you use is going to be the most optimal. But if you feel comfortable in the 12 to 15 and you want to keep cranking out 12 to 15, that's perfectly fine. More importantly than the reps is the intensity that you use. As long as whatever reps you're doing are plenty hard enough, not too hard where you're going to hurt yourself and kind of go to failure all the time, not too easy where you're breezing through it, finding that middle point of intensity and kind of working your way up towards failure and then coming back down is going to be the best way. Don't get so caught up on rep ranges. That wraps up today's podcast. Q&A part 1, part 2 is coming next week. I really appreciate every single one of you guys that included a question. And if you didn't hear your question, like I said at the beginning of this episode, if you didn't hear your question today, it'll be in next week's episode for sure. I appreciate the questions, though. That'll wrap up episode number 52 of the Made to Excel Fitness podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. Hit the follow button on Instagram at MTE Fit. I'll clip up this podcast so you can see it. And I'm starting to post more TikToks. Follow me on TikTok at MTE Fit as well. I'm really enjoying TikTok, actually. So follow me on all those platforms. Subscribe here to the show. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.
What's up, Mark? How you doing, man? Hunter Henry, LA Charger tight end. Best big time shout out to your fitness podcast, the Made to Excel Fitness podcast. So super cool, man. Got a lot going on. Bolt Ganger, don't bang.